Hello, my name is Mike Brown, and this is my 321 activity for ACTE633. So let's go ahead and get started. As far as the first part of the activity, we're supposed to identify three key characteristics that define our position in the K-12 system. So this is my 12th year as an 8th grade science teacher over at Manor Middle School, which is part of the Penn Manor School District. My classroom is entirely face-to-face. However, for the past couple years, I have started to integrate Google Classroom, as our school is a Google Suite district, and that allows us to utilize the full gamut of Google's tools. So this is my third year doing that, and it's been very successful up until this point. So I'm very happy with it. As far as my second characteristic, I am working towards my master's in online education. I plan to embrace this trend that we're seeing, this growth of the digital classroom, and making sure we meet these students, headlong, right in with them, and understanding where they're at in the world, and developing with them and making sure that we're teaching them in meaningful ways. The apps and programs that are coming out on almost a daily basis really do allow you to drill down and meet the kids where they're at with their specific needs. I do teach a heterogeneously grouped classroom, and what I mean by that is I have all levels in my classroom. I have students that have specifically identified learning disabilities in the same classroom as students that at some point have been identified as gifted, and with that, I have the full gamut in between, which makes for a very awesome classroom, but it does have a lot of challenges within the classroom as well, making sure you meet the needs of all those students. As far as the second portion here, we're supposed to identify two ways from the readings about motivation and emotion and connecting them to the presentation by Rita Pearson. And I first have to say that Rita was an amazing presenter. I have her quote here: "Kids don't learn from people they don't like." I think that's the first thing I'd like to talk about, also including the target method from Dr. Deemer. But making sure that you make the kids a stakeholder in the educational process. They need to understand why they're there, but you also have to build that rapport. Rapport gets you about 90% of the way, I think, in your classroom. The other 10% is going to be just if the kid likes your content area. But as far as building that rapport, making the kids don't have to look at you as a friend, but they need to understand that you're human. You're willing to work with them. You're not just a robot that's going to throw worksheets at them and move on. You're going to help them learn this stuff. You also need to make sure that you allow the kids to make mistakes. Rita put in her presentation the idea of the student that got 18 wrong on his quiz out of 20. But instead of putting minus 18, she put plus 2, because she showed him that he still got something right. She gave him a positive spin on that really negative situation. That's a great perspective to have in that situation. Showing the kids that mistakes are okay, and that's how you learn. That's where some of the best learning happens. It's when you make mistakes. You move on from that point, and you hopefully don't make that mistake again, or if you do, it's not as severe. As far as connecting and motivating the students, in the reading from the book assigned for this class, I found it very interesting, the point that they made about, the students we have today are come from a world in which they've never not had technology. They've always been experiencing what we consider modern technology. But we're using methods that are from an era that had none of that technology. And I think what we really need to make sure we do is not ask the kids to downgrade, but for us to upgrade. We need to continue in the progress of developing better methods of reaching the kids where they're at, instead of asking them to come down to essentially what they would consider the ancient level from where some of these education methods come from. The book also stresses that attention is one of the scarcest resources we have today, and I agree with that. There are 1,000 things pulling our students every day in different directions, and it doesn't matter what it is. I think we as teachers need to understand that we are a part of that system, and we need to make sure that we have set ourselves up with the kids to the point where they feel that we are something worthwhile to attend. We are a necessary part in their world, because that's a hard part or hard place to be in when you're vying for attention from these students. And we're asking for a lot of attention from them on a daily basis. The book also quotes or is quoted as saying, we're seeing the death of patience and the need for instant gratification. And I see this even in myself. I grew up in an era where we had the Dewey Decimal System. I was still young, but we had it. We used it in our libraries. And now you can Google search anything instantaneously. So when it doesn't happen right now when I want it to, you get frustrated. So we need to make sure we identify that with our students and understand from where they're coming from, and creating those things, setting those ideas up in our classrooms, I think really does motivate them and get them engaged in your classroom. Once you establish who you are, what you're doing there, the true learning can actually happen. For the last part of the assignment, we're supposed to identify where we plan on developing within this course as teachers and as students. So I would really like to develop in the area of connecting with my students. I really need or would like to meet them at their needs because they're so varied and they're changing. They're ever changing every year. I feel like the students what they bring to my classroom is so different every year. And developing this technology and these classrooms that we can hopefully kind of bring that all together and make sure we meet the kids where they're at so they feel valued in the school. Looking at the INACOL standards, making sure you set up the fact that the kids have a voice and they feel heard. Not just that you throw out a suggestion box, but they actually feel like they're a part of the educational system because they are, and they need to understand that. As far as my ideas of mastery goals, I fully embrace that idea. Being in public education, there is a performance goal aspect that we're never going to get away from. There's always going to be check boxes. There's always going to be a grade system. But having the mastery of a subject as your main goal, I think, is true education. So for me as a teacher, I want to make sure I'm looking at the whole student, not just my content area. I don't want to focus on science every waking moment. I also want to make sure I allow the students to see that learning is a process and it takes time. It's not an instantaneous thing. They do have to work at it. And mastery takes time. You can't, it's okay if you don't get the subject's content the first time. You just move on from there. You keep working at it. You got to make progress. For me as a student in this class, I want to make sure I make a conscious effort to remember the last 2 points, making sure that I'm hitting those in my classroom and meeting those needs of those students, because that's hard and very easy to forget sometimes because of the go, go, go mentality that we have in public education nowadays. I also want to make sure I learn ways to connect with my students that support their learning. Within a class like this, hopefully developing ways that we can identify, how to keep pushing forward and making sure that these students feel valued, but they also are getting what they need out of the classroom as a whole. All right. I thank you for your time watching, and I look forward to the discussions. Thank you very much.